15 people waiting. I've got a lot to get through. Oh, I see Stephanie is here. Stephanie, have you got your book with you? Have you got your version of this book? If so, then we should maybe do a StreamYard the next time. Maybe you should, maybe we could kind of do it together in a way, you know. Axie's here. Good to see you, Axie. Christine's here as well. Also good to see you. I wonder if I move this back, if you'll get a better view of the picture behind me. It really is a big picture. Can you see it goes on all the way there and all the way there? Anyway, sorry about this. Let me just sort out the tripod. It's a little bit wonky. Is that worse? Okay. I just don't like having the top showing like that, but I don't know if I can do any better than that. Maybe if I do this. Wow, suddenly there are a lot of people in here. Terry, good to see you. PW, Kathy B, Karina. Karina, am I pronouncing your name right? Sharon Tuck. Let's just try doing this, see if it takes away the top there. There we go, that's better. It's quite amazing, hey, the brush strokes. Now, what's quite amazing with this artwork behind me is it's blown up probably to 3 times its actual size, and it still actually looks very coherent. It's still a very beautiful sort of artwork to have in my bedroom. I've actually got 2 that are sort of this size. Timmy, now that I'm doing a live, would you like to be part of it? Timmy, would you like to? Okay. There we go. Okay. SM Kovalinsky, also good to have you here. I'm not sure if I've greeted you, Kathy B, but good to see you here as well. So, yeah, this is quite a long episode, which is why I've got my coffee with me. I don't normally drink coffee, but I definitely need it tonight. It's 11 o'clock at night my time. I've kind of done a double workout at the gym, a cycle and a swim. So I don't know, I'm just kind of running on a half battery in a way. So that is what the coffee's for. Terry says, I love the subtle earthy green of the field. Yeah, it actually becomes quite sort of a dark color as you sort of go that way. Can you look how dark that blue is? Over there, and also the green. There's an amazing contrast between the field and the blue sky there. Do you see that? So maybe I'll just orientate it that way so that you can see that. Stephanie says, I can be here extended today. Sorry about last night. Yeah, I was actually asking how you spent Valentine's Day, and then suddenly you were just gone. Terry Dean says you can feel the approaching storm. So I was actually going to wear a t-shirt today, and then I just thought that this shirt kind of brings out the sky background in quite a nice way. Phyllis Michelle Greenhouse, welcome to the channel. Good to have you here. Christine says the colors are amazing. Roiling clouds, that's absolutely right. Now, if you think about the roiling clouds and the roiling background to, yes, Timmy, let's look at this book, Timmy. Timmy, let's look at this book. Look. There's kind of a similarity in a way in the electricity of the sort of blue background. You don't know whether it's sky or just the background, but he gives a lot of energy to his backgrounds, right? PW says excellent shirt choice. Okay, so I just want to look at the notes that I made here that I'm supposed to go through before we start. So this is kind of just to introduce this episode. Right behind me, if you go that way and through the door, like literally just out the door here, I sort of came out another room and there was like dripping on a carpet, and I thought, oh, okay, so there's a bit of a problem. I was even look, Timmy wants to eat my notes. Timmy, you want to eat it? Timmy, do you want to eat my notes, Timmy? Timmy, do you want to read my notes, Timmy? Okay, so anyway, so I did call a plumber, and you had this really weird situation where there's just this little dripping. The only thing I know is that there's a little bit of water dripping from the roof, right? So the plumber sort of ascends up a ladder into like a trapdoor, and I'm standing below the ladder, and he's up there, and he's shining a light, and he's seeing what's going on. And I'm wanting to know what the situation is, because I don't know, I can't see it, and I'm relying on him to tell me what he's seeing and what is going on. And everything he says gives me a little bit more information, but it made me think that true crime is a lot like that as well. You are presented with very little information. For example, let's say in the Morphew case, a woman disappears. That's like just the dripping from the roof. That's all you know, a woman has disappeared. And then you get a little bit more information via your investigator, who is seeing things as he sees them. And so what he tells me is, he first says, oh, this doesn't look so serious. So it's like, oh, okay, so I guess it's not so serious. So in terms of true crime, you might say, oh, it's not really serious, just a woman is missing, she'll come back. But then he tells me a bit more, and he says, oh, okay, this and that and that. And then eventually he says, you know what, it looks like a swimming pool in your roof, and if you'd waited very much longer to call me, this part of your roof would have collapsed, and this needs to be replaced. And I'm just saying true crime is a lot like that. It can pretend to be very innocuous, especially when someone's covered up a crime. It can pretend to be other than it is. So when I just see a few little drops dripping from my roof, you've got no idea what you're dealing with. Also, if you don't go and investigate it yourself, and often in true crime, we can't investigate things ourselves. I'm not saying we can never do that. I mean, I went to these countrysides behind me. I went there, right? I'm not saying you can't investigate it, but in certain instances, it's a bit kind of practically difficult to investigate every crime scene. So you're relying on what someone else is seeing. You're relying on what someone else is telling you. And in the same way, what he told me to sort of in the beginning, it's not so bad. Oh, well, it looks like your roof is about to collapse. You're going to have to replace your geyser. This could cost you, I don't know, about $1,000 or so. And I'm probably going to replace the geyser with a solar geyser, so it'll probably be even more expensive. But I hope you see what I'm talking about is how we perceive just the surface of something, and it relies on a much more effort to actually know what is the true state of things. Does that make sense? And the same applies to Van Gogh. You can spend a little bit of time getting to know him, and you'll know, okay, so there is a situation, whatever, but you've really got to go to a bit more trouble to climb up into the roof, to turn your phone on, shine your torch, to sort of navigate the difficulties of the rafters and whatever, to see, oh, this is actually the true state of affairs. You've got to make yourself a bit uncomfortable to get to that place where you start seeing things for the way that they really are, right? Phyllis says, eventually, if there is time, I want to ask Nick a Van Gogh-related question, but askew from his topic. Is that okay? Phyllis, you're welcome to shoot now, if you like. Is True Jedi Forever here? Okay, good to see you as well. Okay, so just waiting for Phyllis's question. Before we get to that, there's another thing I just wanted to mention, just something that I thought is really interesting. I follow a triathlon channel called Team Charles Barkley, and it's about a world champion triathlete. And thanks, Karina. And I was watching this particular video where she actually becomes, well, let me just put it this way. She talks about all the difficulties they have, like lots and lots of things that are sort of niggles and problems that they deal with. I'm not going to name them all, but they just go through a lot of difficulties and actually talk about it. They talk about how they struggle to find a place to train, and there was a bit of damage to a bike and they couldn't, anyway, lots of different things. Then when she actually took part in the race, she said it felt like she just floated through the whole race. She actually won the race and became world champion. And those two narratives work with one another, meaning all those difficulties that you overcome, all those difficulties that you transcend, if you didn't have that, the race wouldn't be as easy, or wouldn't feel as easy and as effortless and as transcendent as it does feel. You need the one for the other. So the fact that they had all of these obstacles and hurdles and difficulties, and then when the race came along, it was like, wow, nothing went wrong. Well, it felt like I was floating on air. Actually, it wasn't floating on air, but compared to the narrative of difficulty and so on, it is like that. And I want to compare that. It might sound silly, but I want to compare that to the, Ivy, the cat that sometimes stays here. When I give her food, and sometimes when she goes for a poo, she will use her paw to sort of cover up the food that she's left over, but she can't sort of paw anything because there's no dirt. It's just like the vinyl counter, right? When she has a poo, she will sometimes paw at the trash can, which is next to her litter box. And obviously she's not getting any purchase on any dirt or anything to cover up anything. Obviously the dirt is in her litter box, but what is going on there is her instincts are overriding logic or overriding her attention to reality. She knows that the right thing for a cat to do is to cover the smell of food and of excrement, but she's now in a different situation, and even though there's nothing to cover it up with, she's still trying to cover it up, right? And so I think a lot of people are like that as well. They are stuck on their narratives, and even if you show them that it's not accurate, their narratives nevertheless override reality because they are comfortable with that. So your narrative can cloud reality, and it might help you to deal with reality. And changing a narrative can uncloud it. The question is, can you deal with the discomfort of an unclouded, clear reality? And that, I think, is part of the issue with the Van Gogh case. Can you deal with a new reality in terms of the story? Can you deal with the world has been told a certain story. Well, what if it's like the cat trying to cover over something, but there's actually nothing there? It's just a narrative that the cat is instinctually used to. And so in the same way, we instinctually recycle the Van Gogh story because we feel like we've got nothing else to work with. So we just recycle, we paw at nothing. But we have a sense of comfort that, well, we know the story and we're doing something we know where we are. We know where we are located within a certain reality, and the issue is actually we don't. In the same way that the cat is just being silly, doing that is having no effect. We also being silly, pawing at nothing, right? So let's look at what Phyllis says. Looks like you've made quite a few comments here. So you said, I equated the large looming figure in the foreground of Starry Night with a deep synchronicity with biblical law, hence the burning bush. I believe he was raised Christian. I don't know this is fact, but I think that is fairly accurate. Yes, he was. He was raised as a Protestant, and he in fact studied for a while and practiced as a minister himself. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. So I don't know what your question is. Are you just wanting to know about whether Van Gogh was a Christian? Actually says first you have to know and recognize you have a story or narrative. Yeah. So like with Brian Laundrie, his overriding narrative was, I've got this amazing girlfriend, and that makes me who I am. And he wasn't able to live without that narrative. He wasn't able to find a realistic narrative in the place of that one. Essen Kowalinsky says, perceiving the surface is an apt expression of this. Phyllis talks about the idea of a burning bush. Yeah, it is a bit out of context. I'm not really sure what you're getting at. So there's a burning bush in Starry Night, and that means he's a Christian. I'm not sure. So it's sort of like, so what? I mean, maybe it is, and I'm not quite sure where that takes you. Karina says Australian TV has a video out about Van Gogh's death, that it was an accidental shooting caused by the wild drunk boy he painted. I haven't watched it yet, but I have the link. Sorry, Phyllis, I'm not going to scroll back. If you've got a question, it's fine, but if it's like a whole long thing, sorry, not going to be able to do that. Yeah, sorry if I'm reading out of context. Okay, Timmy, let's go. Okay, I think we're going to get started on this chapter. We're already at 20 minutes into this, and so this is how the chapter starts off. We're dealing with Orvez and the portrait of Dr. Gachet, not Starry Night. So, that is the situation we're in. We're dealing with this right now. I don't know, we can sort of just cancel this episode and we can talk about all the other paintings that he did except what we're supposed to talk about in this one. So you can say, okay, this chapter is about the portrait of Dr. Gachet. Let's talk about any other portrait that he did, So anyway, the portrait of Dr. Gachet is chapter 5. This is page 53 of it. And he says, I've done the portrait of Dr. Gachet with an expression of melancholy. And so Van Gogh is quite specific to say that he's trying to convey melancholy, which I guess is another word for depression or sadness or unhappiness, in terms of his portrait of Dr. Gachet, right? And if you think about his whole body of work in Orvez, it's like, where else is he trying to convey that? So it's almost like the only instance where he portrays a negative emotion, in a sense, an overtly negative emotion that is not happiness, is in his portrait of Dr. Gashay, where he says, I'm trying to portray melancholy. And he did other portraits of other individuals, and he wasn't trying to convey melancholy with them. And we're going to come to why this is significant. So I'm just going to show you some of the pages here. There is an actual picture of Dr. Gachet. I don't know if you can see that. And there are some of my highlights over there. You can see there are a few WTFs. There he has the two portraits side by side. And think about the blue in these portraits and the blue behind me. Notice it's like a white and blue in the one portrait of Dr. Gachet, the first version, and the other one, it's kind of like blue. And then there are these two pages as well. There's the etching. You can see there are my highlights as well. And then it ends off with this picture of Marguerite Gachet in the garden, and then a couple of more highlights. And that's really what I'm going to take you through in this analysis. Stephanie says, I've highlighted mine with highlight tape. So you're not destroying the original book, Stephanie. You're kind of making sure the tape is, when you say tape, do you mean like almost like Post-its? Is it like sticky Post-its? Side by side helps, yeah. Okay, so I think we need to kind of get going. This is really long. I hope I'm going to be able to get through it all. When I originally read Van Gogh's finale, Martin Bailey's account of the last summer the Dutch artist spent in Auvers-sur-Oise, I did so at a single sitting. And in order to prep for this episode, I headed to chapter 5, page 53, and went through the 8 pages with a fine-tooth comb. I just kind of went through it slower, more slowly, more carefully. What I discovered blew my mind, and I think it's going to blow yours. I don't know whether what I'm going to tell you is something that I actually previously researched in The Murder of Vincent van Gogh and I've just forgotten about. I think Stephanie might be able to alert me to that or not, but nevertheless, it is mind-blowing. We're going to go systematically through the chapter, step by step, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, page by page. To start off with, Bailey quotes Van Gogh under the chapter title, as I say, wanting to convey melancholy. We know that Van Gogh's arrival coincided with the 15th anniversary of the doctor's wife's death, and that Van Gogh's first impression with the doctor was unfavorable. I wouldn't be surprised if the first thing he sort of experienced, the first thing he sort of saw with Dr. Gashay was that he looked miserable, that he looked sad, that he looked depressed because of it was the anniversary of his wife's death. That was what made an impression on him. I've also said that, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but throughout the canon dealing with Van Gogh in Auvers, virtually the only dark cloud in a sea of vibrant color and vibrant vitality is the doctor himself. He's kind of the exception to this liveliness, this joyful celebration of life and whatnot. To be fair, Van Gogh describes himself at one point as being of the same temperament as the doctor, which may be an indirect way of saying Van Gogh was prone to melancholy, that is depression as well. I don't think, and I mean that may be true, he may have been prone to it previously in his life, but I really don't think it was something that was a problem for him when he was in Auvers, and that's part of what we're trying to establish chapter by chapter. Does Van Gogh say, well, you know, I woke up today and I just couldn't get out of bed, or I woke up today and I was like, you know what, life is crap. You know, does that happen? Or is he super motivated, super busy, super kind of industrious, great work ethic, all that kind of thing? I don't think it's a huge insight to say that that he had depression occasionally, Van Gogh. I'm sure he was pretty morbid after losing his ear. I think most people would be. And during several episodes where he felt the isolation of the asylum, the loneliness of the asylum, I don't think there are many signs of Van Gogh being depressed while he was in Orvez. In fact, quite the opposite. We are still needing to go through a lot more to verify that. So make a note, like make a mental note. Are we going to, in future chapters, are we going to find signs or symptoms that he's depressed? That is something we need to keep asking and keep answering until the day that he dies, until the very last day of summer. Sharon Tuck says the artwork on your wall is mesmerizing. Can you see that over there? That is actually kind of an individual, that's a sort of someone doing something. Can you see that? And I don't know if you always see that in the smaller portrait. The doctor's melancholy, which Van Gogh identifies and highlights in his famous painting, casts a shadow over Van Gogh's last summer in Orvez, to the extent that I think the doctor shot the artist, and the facts surrounding the day and plenty of circumstantial evidence seems to support this notion. On page 53, I've highlighted Bailey's reference to, Bailey talks about Van Gogh's initial hesitations, and then I juxtapose that with Bailey's reference to Van Gogh and the doctor being firm friends now. So the initial hesitations, but now they're firm friends. It reminds me a little bit of Meredith Kercher and Amanda Knox, except that initial hesitations led to serious reservations and misgivings. And one wonders whether that didn't happen here, whether there were some initial hesitations, then they get along, and then later on, when you really get to know somebody, well, now there are actually serious reservations. You don't even have to know much about Van Gogh in Orvez to appreciate that this pattern had actually repeated in Van Gogh's life a few times, starting at home, meaning initial hesitations and then serious reservations. So starting at his home, where his parents actually wanted to kick him out, and he said he felt like a shaggy dog, that he was just sort of tolerated by his folks. This is him moving back home after he'd sort of not made a success of his work as an art dealer. And then the same thing repeated with his brother. And his brother, I think, sort of said that he could be this wonderful guy, but he could also be incredibly selfish and horrible to be around. And his brother also wanted, Theo also wanted his brother eventually just to please leave, kind of thing. And he made this weird comment where he said, if I ask him to leave, I know he's going to stay. So I'm not going to ask him to leave, but I wish he would leave. And then you had the same thing with Paul Gogh. So it's like initially hesitations, now they're firm friends, but then doesn't that lead to serious reservations later on? The reality was that Vincent van Gogh was hard to live with. That's the reality. A lot of people think, oh, Vincent van Gogh, I love his art, he's so great. Look how beautiful that is. But if you actually had to meet up with him, I don't know whether you would, or if he invited you to be kind of a housemate with him, I don't know how long you would last. I don't know how long you would want to put up with him, with his nervous energy, with his opinions, with his strong opinions on things, with his bad habits, with his manic energy kind of thing. You might not feel comfortable with him because he smelled, because he dressed like a tramp, because he was lonely, because there's a certain cloying neediness, and he wouldn't stop talking. Perhaps because he'd want to take you to the nearest brothel, because that would be his idea of having fun and bonding, and one of his favorite pastimes, getting drunk. And you might say, oh, I also like getting drunk, let's hang, but it would be like, wow, you keep wanting to do this. Can you not just sort of do this in a bit of moderation? Perhaps he just had a nervous energy about him that was unsettling and even irritating. And now this character is in Orvez, in this idyllic setting. It's a peaceful setting, and here he comes with his chaotic energy, his busy mind, and not only to Orvez, but also to the household of Dr. Gachet. It's not like he just pitches up there one day, he's introduced, and they live happily ever after. He arrives there, they have a first impression of him, he has a first impression of them, and then they kind of get to know one another, and they get to know one another more and more, better and better. And then ... question mark. What happens when you get to know Van Gogh better and better and better? So what you're going to be astonished about in this particular episode is we're going to get to know a side to Van Gogh that I'm certainly aware of. That's why I want to write this book, The Mistress of Van Gogh. But you probably are not aware of this, and I think a lot of people wouldn't be aware of this. And we come quite slyly to this information. We come quite through to kind of a back door where we tap into the psychology, the thinking, the thing that resonates with Van Gogh. We come there through a very unexpected path. If you don't know what that means, well, you'll know soon enough. I don't know why there were initial hesitations when the pair hardly knew one another. There wouldn't be subsequent hesitations when they got to know. Let me say that again. Sorry, I'm reading it. It's not coming out quite right. I don't know why, if there were initial hesitations when the pair hardly knew one another, why wouldn't there be subsequent hesitations when they got to know each other better? Both men, the artist and the doctor, were an acquired taste. Let me say that again. Both men, Vincent van Gogh and this doctor, were an acquired taste. Have you ever heard someone being described that way? That person was kind of an acquired taste. I'm not sure how acquired taste people get along with other acquired taste people. In the movie, that animated movie, it's really worth watching if you haven't watched it, Loving Vincent, and other films from Van Gogh, arguments do blow up between the pair. You do see arguments depicted between the doctor and Vincent van Gogh. One argument involved Van Gogh insisting that the doctor frame a particular canvas from a prominent artist. So just think about this try to imagine this in a very basic way. Van Gogh is a guest in the doctor's house. He comes and visits, he comes and has lunch, he does a portrait, whatever. He becomes quite familiar with them. They become quite familiar with him. And in this sort of casual familiarity, on one occasion he notices thanks a lot, Becky B, he notices a canvas sort of just lying on the ground or sort of propped up on a chair, right? And Vincent, being Vincent, kind of gets pretty peed off about it. He's like, because he's an artist, and I wonder what Vincent van Gogh would say about this not being framed. It's just kind of mounted on a canvas. In fact, all of my Van Gogh prints are not framed except for the portrait that I've got of him, a self-portrait, that is framed. But anyway, Van Gogh saw this canvas from, I think, quite a well-known artist. I don't know if it was Dubigny or Monet or whoever, but it was, I guess, kind of a established, respected artist, and he thought this was sacrilege. It was sacrilege to have an artwork of that kind of caliber just sort of propped up against a chair or whatever, unframed. And he made his feelings felt, and it wasn't appreciated. I don't know how you would feel if someone comes into your house and, it says that. Funny enough, a long time ago, it's just a bit of a random memory I've got. A long time ago, I was in Cape Town. I was in this millionaire's, I don't know if it was his home or his office or both, and I was sort of applying for a job with him, and his house had just burned down somewhere along the coast. And while we were sort of moving through his home, I noticed a picture on the wall, and it was by my great grandfather, and it was like a big piece of, it was an etching, I think, with a piece of glass over the front, and the glass was cracked across the front of the etching. And I think I said something like, "Wow, you should maybe fix this." And then he said something like, "Well, if I hire you, you'll do it. That'll be the first thing you do." But it may be a little bit of a similar situation, seeing your own family member's art in someone else's home, but it's got a crack across the front of it. I'm just saying, you can kind of have a sense of, I don't really appreciate you coming here and telling me what to do with what's in my home, if you know what I'm saying. So that was one of the arguments against the doctor that Van Gogh had. You can understand Van Gogh feeling that way, but you can also understand the doctor thinking, "Jeepers, yes, I will do it. You don't need to tell me," kind of thing. I suspect that the final argument leading to Van Gogh being shot involved Van Gogh's daughter. That is purely a theory. I think it is hinted at in Loving Vincent. But just this morning, I watched a short clip of Marguerite in Loving Vincent saying, "I'm not that important." Maybe I should just show you the actress who portrays her. I don't know if this is going to mess up my stand, but anyway. There, can you see her there? It's an Irish actress who plays the role of Marguerite in Loving Vincent. Is this gonna... Okay. So in this portrayal, she says, "I'm not that important," in terms of the Van Gogh story. The fact that she has to say it, the fact that Van Gogh painted her portrait and her father's, means she's ipso facto a very important part of this final closing narrative. You know, it's like she was one of the last people to see him regularly before he died. If Van Gogh's relationship with Gachet started off as initial hesitation, soon leading them to becoming firm friends, one wonders, was there a similar trajectory with Marguerite? Is Christine heading off? Looks like I must check my chat here. Christine says, "I'm not feeling well, so I hop off. Enjoy the rest of the live." Okay. Looks like it's... just look at some of the other comments. Corina says, "Thank you again for posting the movie. I was so enchanted. I'm glad you saw it." Is Susan Becker here? Oh, okay. Good to have you here. You're just getting in at a good time. We're starting to sort of hit our stride in terms of this particular episode. So on page 53 of Van Gogh's Finale, this book by art expert Martin Bailey, it references the contrast between the dramatically colored Dr. Gachet's garden and the more subdued image of the doctor's daughter. Thanks a lot, Susan. If you know Van Gogh, it feels like he's quite a difficult fellow to subdue generally. So if you look at the art behind me, would you say it's subdued? You know, has he drawn sort of gray clouds? Has he drawn just this field that is just like kind of boring? Or does it feel like it's invigorated, it's injected with energy and vitality and color and feeling kind of thing, right? So, you know, you have the dramatically colored Dr. Gachet's garden, and then the question you've kind of got to ask is, why do you have the doctor's daughter, and this is in Martin Bailey's own words, why does the doctor's daughter seem to be a more subdued image? So if you know Van Gogh, you know a lot of his art is this invigorated violence, this invigorated energy, this energized landscape. And then when he paints Dr. Gachet's daughter, it's kind of subdued. I don't know if subdued is the right word, but it's just kind of calm. And it's almost like there's I don't know why this is popping in my head, but there's a scene in Batman versus Superman where Clark Kent is interviewing Bruce Wayne, and then there's a moment where Diana Prince, the woman who plays Wonder Woman, sort of walks by, and suddenly Bruce Wayne sort of is kind of calm, or he's kind of, I don't know what the word is, subdued, but he's kind of looking at this woman. And that is, the darkness that's in him, the stress or whatever, for a moment, that is just subdued, if that makes sense. In other words, there's maybe a sense of rapture, a sense of, I don't know if infatuation's the word, attraction. And maybe that is what subdues all that chaotic energy, is a feeling of, wow, she's beautiful. You know what I mean? It's a different sense of the landscape and the color and the houses. You have a person that is capturing your attention in a way that silences you. Like you are so caught up, so captivated that you are quietened, if that makes sense. Possibly because you're looking for a sign that are they noticing you. Of course, if you're noticing the landscape, you walk through it and your feet crunch, crunch, crunch on the grass, and you breathing hard and whatever, and you're looking around. You don't expect the landscape to sort of reflect back and to see you. But if there's another person there, you may be quieter in the sense of, this is a living being. Does this living being notice me? I'm noticing her, and I'm noticing that does she notice me, kind of thing. That's important. So if you know Van Gogh, it feels like he's quite a difficult fellow to subdue generally. He's very excitable, but there is a sense, a contrast between how the artist sees the father and the strong colors he uses, and he also has the doctor looking at him, and then how he sees the daughter, which is the artist looking at the daughter while painting her, while she's presented in profile, her eyes averted. Let's just look at some of your comments. Thanks, Susan. I thought you guys would like it. Actually says, I think her energy grounded him. So let me just show you what I mean. So we want to look at the portrait of Dr. Gachet, get a sense of the excitability around him, in the landscape around him, but also the contrast of the colors. So the contrast of the colors, look at the picture behind me. You've got this vivid blue and almost yellow-green, but then you have the roiling clouds. It's quite an excited landscape. Now we want to look at the picture of Dr. Gachet and kind of ask ourselves, how does he see Dr. Gachet versus how does he see his daughter? And so let me just turn this around. Again, I hope I'm going to be able to put this up again. So there's Dr. Gachet. There's a lot of blue, but there's also a lot of this and that, including on his coat. And then look at the contrast in colors here. That corn-colored yellow and an almost black blue, and that very luminous neon green, and then this table that's got orange and that neon green again. You've got the neon green there and there, right? And then this is the portrait of Marguerite Gachet. Would you say it's more subdued? Where are those energy lines that you see here and there, even in the face? Where do you see that there? Can you see it is more subdued? And it's quite a big picture as well. There are energy lines here, but they kind of lower down, whereas in Dr. Gachet, they're higher up. If you just look at the contrast of color, white and that color green, white and brown, there's a little bit of sort of red there. If you just look at the contrast of the colors, and if you look at that, almost a blackish color, white and brown, there's also some green there. And you look at Dr. Gachet, look how vivid the color contrasts are with the orange, the yellow, that lime green color. Do you see what I'm getting at? This is a more subdued picture. It's also a much larger picture. That is a much larger picture than that. Okay, could you guys see that? I can't really see when I'm showing you, when I'm turning the thing around. Let's just look at what you guys are saying. Do you think her music also captivated him? Maybe. Maybe. So with Marguerite, there's an effort to present her entire body. I think that is also quite interesting. It's a full portrait from head to toe, whereas with the doctor, we see him from like the waist up, right? The size of the portrait of Dr. Gachet. So if you just want to be kind of a bit simplistic about it, you say, how big is the picture of Dr. Gachet? How big is the portrait of Marguerite? Well, isn't that just in that very basic sense, the size of the one portrait versus the size of the other? Isn't that going to give you a sense of the investment into the one portrait versus the other portrait? His interest in the one subject versus his interest in the other. And so the answer is the portrait of Dr. Gashay is 67 centimeters by 56 centimeters. Marguerite at the piano is almost twice the size at 102.5 centimeters times 50 centimeters. Just based on the size of the portrait, it feels like Vincent was more interested, more invested, more busy, and more focused on the doctor's daughter. Is that fair to say? Is that a fair thing to speculate on? Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Van Gogh also commented to his brother Theo that he thought that Joe, this is quite an interesting point that just reinforces what I'm saying. So you might say, you know what, you're speculating. Well, this anchors it in what we know, right? Van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo, wrote this down so it's documented, that he thought that Joe, Theo's wife, would get along well with Marguerite. Now, you are, I think, all women that are watching and listening, tell me if I'm wrong when I say this. Well, I guess it is coming from a male perspective to some extent. I don't think Van Gogh said that just willy-nilly. I think he wanted Marguerite and his brother's wife to hang out as a premise kind of thing so that he could hang out with her as a way of brokering a kind of access to her. Does that make sense? Is that fair to say that? He wants to include Marguerite with his family. Now, if you think that that's reaching, well, there's another person in the household besides Dr. Paul Gachet and Marguerite Gachet, and that is Paul Gachet Jr., and we definitely need to talk about him. But he doesn't say, you know what, Paul and Theo will get along really well, you guys should hang out. Paul, you should hang out with Theo. He says, Joe, you should hang out with Marguerite. Do you see where I'm coming from? He doesn't want to hang out with Paul, he wants to hang out with Marguerite. The other thing to note are the hands of Dr. Gachet versus his daughter. Dr. Gachet's one hand is resting on the table and the other is up. So it's sort of like kind of a mismatch. The one hand is down, the other one is up, right? In a real sense, Van Gogh seems to be drawing attention to the doctor's hand. look how it's completely surrounded by orange. Cheapers, I'm going to have to turn this around again. Okay, so can you see how his hand is completely surrounded by orange? And look at when you show the whole thing, how the hand stands out. Sorry about this cord that's here. See how that the hand stands out? It's almost like in the foreground saying, look at my hand, right? Okay. It's starting to fall over there. Okay. That is the second one, but the first one also has the same thing. Yeah, that is the second painting of Dr. Gachet, but the first one, the hand is also surrounded by orange. But the reason why I want to show you the fake portrait above, there's a little more of a point to the hand being where it is, if that makes sense. It's holding a flower now. If you look at the other painting, it's not actually touching the flower, just sort of on the table. The flower there seems to kind of be in a glass, so there's no reason really for the hand to be there. The flower is taken care of. Now there's a point to the hand being there. It's holding the flower. The foxgloves have been moved closer. As I said, the glass or vase has been removed, and perhaps his hand is there to prevent the foxglove from being blown away like in a gust of wind. It still feels awkward that one hand is down on the table holding something while the other is propping up his face. Now, it may be reading too much into things, but Van Gogh often used green to denote envy. It's in the original portrait of Dr. Gashay around his eyes. And it's in his portrait of Paul Gogh with his back turned to the artist. And notice the silver nose, and it's an entire wall behind Marguerite is green as well. So let me just show you, just take another sip of coffee. Oh, that's good. Okay, let's just turn this around again. This is Van Gogh's portrait of Paul Gogh. Notice how virtually the entire portrait is green. And look at the silver nose. What do you think that denotes? But look at all of this green. You see that? And while we're here, let me just show you a portrait he does of Adeline Revue. This is the innkeeper's daughter. You don't see any green in this portrait. There's green over there. There is not much green in this, but there's green there in that background. And there's green there and around his eyes. Do you see that? There's more green in this picture than in the fake one. See, there's almost no green in this. There's a little bit over there. But he puts green here as well on the table in the buttons. Do you see that? Over here, no green, and over here, lots of green again. What does that mean? Best part of my day is joining you all and getting a piece of Nick's brilliant mind, okay? This is just so hard to prop up. Okay. Let's just check out your comments again. Karina says, from a little distance, the left hand in the second portrait seems almost crude. I was going to ask you about the silver nose. I think the silver nose denotes a kind of a snooty, snobbish person, almost like saying someone's born with a silver spoon in their hand. And he did come from a privileged background, Paul Gogh. He was an aristocratic guy, a guy with aristocratic friends and tastes. Okay, so let's go further. There's just a heck of a lot of green in the portrait of Marguerite Gachet. I would say at least half of the background is green. That's a heck of a lot of green. I also don't know if I can think of a single portrait Van Gogh did of someone that shows them in their full length. So there's something special about his portrait of Marguerite Gachet. Do you see that? He paints a full length of her. That's the one part. The other part is it's a very big portrait, double the size of Dr. Gachet. The other thing, which may mean something or may not, is the huge amount of green in it. At the bottom of page 53, I've circled the word delighted. It's true, Van Gogh did struggle to get models to pose for him, and he went through a phase where he had to actually pay prostitutes to pose for him. Let me just... I can see that the top of this painting is showing again. Is that better? Okay, so he kind of, when he wanted to have models pose, he actually had to pay for prostitutes, and this actually led to a big fallout with his folks. There was a big, what do you call it, a big scandal in his hometown, and it was one of the things that caused opprobrium between his parents, you know, the initial hesitation leading to a lot more hesitation. Those who did pose, those who tended to pose for Van Gogh tended to be people of fairly low status. I'd like to show you these other pictures, but every time I do, it's a schlep to orientate this thing. I really need a proper stand. Maybe the best thing to do is this. I want to put a link to the Patreon post so that you guys can follow. Especially if you're on your desktop. How many of you are watching on your desktops? How many of you are watching this episode on... I think I must just plug in my power source here. Learn how to share your screen. Yeah, I don't actually have someone like the interview room and Scott Reich. They kind of have people who do the background stuff. Yeah, I could learn how to share my screen, but I might need to take a week or two off and study that. So I can kind of spend 2 weeks learning how to do the videos, and then you sort of won't hear from me for a while. I could do that. Okay, Stephanie says she's following along. PW is on the desktop. Okay. And have the book open. Wow, Stephanie, not bad. Okay, so yeah, I'm just not going to show, it is on Patreon. I have put up pictures of the postman. I put up pictures of the boatman. I've also put a picture up of the farm boy. They actually are worth looking at. Let me unplug it again and then just turn it around so you guys can see. So there's the postman, quite a nice portrait. It's also not quite a full length of him. There is the boatman, and there is the farmhand. And these are all portraits that he did when he was in Auvers, with the exception of that one. The other two he did in Auvers. Again, those others aren't particularly big portraits, right? So I'm sure Van Gogh was delighted to be painting Dr. Gachet. If you look at those pictures, it's a boatman, it's a postman, it's a farm boy. Well, this is a high member of society, a high society dude. He was well known in art circles. I think Dr. Gachet was the most prominent high society individual he'd ever painted. One's got to think about that. Think about what a boost that must have felt like. Not only is he painting this guy's portrait, but this guy's really important in the art community, and he's painting his daughter as well, he's painting his garden as well, kind of thing. So, it's this high society individual he's painting, he's also painting his daughter. And then he gives more emphasis to the guy's daughter. It's kind of weird. Is Jean Karras here? Good to see you, Jean. On page 54, I've questioned Bailey describing Van Gogh's probably erroneous perception of the doctor's psychological condition. That is such an important aspect to highlight. In other words, Van Gogh has made an assessment of Dr. Gachet's psychology. In true crime, that is always so important. What did Shanann Watts think of Chris Watts as a person? What kind of person did people say Shanann was? Nicole Atkinson, her parents, his parents. What was Nicole Kessinger's impression of Chris Watts? Blah, blah, blah. Knowing someone's psychology gives you such insight into, and so we get an insight into Dr. Gachet from Vincent van Gogh, and this guy is saying, well, it was probably erroneous. Vincent van Gogh was probably wrong in his psychological portrait of Dr. Gachet. In other words, Dr. Gachet wasn't depressed. Dr. Gachet didn't have melancholy. Bear in mind his background. He's a military doctor. He'd been in action. He was a widower. I don't know if he was enjoying his job because he wanted to become an artist. He was an amateur artist and he wasn't successful at being an amateur artist. And he didn't seem to have too many friends because if he was making friends with Vincent van Gogh, I know it sounds crazy, but if Dr. Gachet was sort of making pals with Vincent van Gogh, you kind of think, well, don't you have other friends? Like, aren't you hanging out with other doctors or other people? Did he have friends, kind of thing? So, frustrated artist. So I've definitely questioned on page 54 Martin Bailey describing Van Gogh's probably erroneous perception of the doctor's psychological condition. So Bailey is quite dismissive. No, there's nothing wrong with the doctor. But what if there was? What if the doctor was peculiar, unusual, strange, not to be trusted, bad-tempered, emotional, whatever? What if it wasn't erroneous at all? What if we shouldn't trust Dr. Gachet? Now for the last. Now we're going to deal with we at just past the hour mark. Now we're dealing with the two major clues in the original portrait. And that's the title of this live stream. These are two major clues that change everything. And what I want you to do when we finish with this, when you wrap up, I'm going to ask you if it's hyperbole, have I exaggerated, or do you feel that it's true that this actually does change everything? Okay. Vincent said to Theo that they should in no way, trust him. Okay, so I'm going to have to turn this around another time. What do you think are the two major clues in this portrait? I'm going to turn this thing around and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to put it up for about 20, 30 seconds, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to answer. Stephanie, if you're following on Patreon, don't give the game away. What do you think are the two major clues in this portrait of Dr. Gachet? What do you think are the two major clues? Is that enough time? Stephanie says, I won't. Thank you. Okay, Axis says, thanks for playing along. Axis says, the foxgloves and his eyes. That's not a bad answer. Karina says, I won't either. Thanks, Karina. Okay, so is this a bit skew? Susan says, the expression and the body posture. That's an interesting answer. Anyone else? What are the two major clues in the portrait of Dr. Gachet? Susan says, I have no clue. Okay. Do you see those two yellow books actually have writing on them? So do I really have to turn this around again? So the two yellow books in the portrait of Dr. Gachet actually have writing on them. It's not just that there are two books there. There's actually writing on them. So isn't that incredible? In his letter to Theo, he simply describes two yellow novels. So when he describes the portrait, he describes the yellow novels. But in reality, in the painting itself, he identifies each. As Stephanie says, this is not just a pair of random books. He's not just saying, here's the doctor, and by the way, the doctor reads, and it's not really important what he's reading, but he's a well-read man, he's an educated man, right? Now, thanks to the expertise of Bailey, we can find out what those books were, and that is where things get really, really, really interesting. I'm just going to turn this around, I think the last time, or the second last time, so I can show you that there is writing on those books. Can you see the writing there? Can you see the writing there? Can you make out what is written there? I think that one, just looking at that, looks like something Salomon, and that one's harder to make out. But we do know what those titles actually were. Okay. Sorry about the chaotic turning and stuff. Somebody did say, just figure out how to put it together. Yeah, it's easier said than done. I have used other programs, and then when it's sort of live time, the live just doesn't actually start, and then it's like, oh, okay, that's tough. So it seems really simple. You just quickly study and you do it, and then it just doesn't work, kind of thing. I've used a lot of quite sophisticated programs only to have it fail when you actually try and execute. I've also tried to hire videographers and blah, 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 but I won't bore you with the details. So anyway, thanks to the expertise of Bailey, we find out what those books were. The one is, I'm not quite sure how to say this, Germany, Lesotho. It's and you can actually, if you like, you can write this down and you can Google it and you can read up about it. So these are well-known novels that came out in France in, I think, the 1860s, around about 20 odd years before Vincent van Gogh's death. So anyway, the one is spelled Germanie, Germanie, Germany, and then Lesotho, Lacerteux. Now, according to Bailey, the lower volume in that portrait of Dr. Gashay is this Germany, Lesotho. I'm probably totally mispronouncing it. Briac will probably know how to say that properly. Germany, Lesotho. Bailey describes briefly, so it's quite important to stress this as well. Remember, this is a bit of a critical review of Bailey's version of events, and he briefly describes that novel as, quote, a downtrodden servant girl who suffers from hardship and melancholia. Yeah, good point, Stephanie. And that's at the bottom of page 54. So that's all he says. It's just really one line. This book is about a downtrodden servant girl and she suffers from hardship and melancholia. And the fact that he's painting the doctor looking looking sad, looking depressed, demonstrating melancholy, and he's got a book that is about melancholy, really emphasizes the same thing, doesn't it? Anyway, that's at the bottom of page 54. Then he deals with the second book. Whoa. Hold on, not so fast. Let us deal with the plot of this book that Van Gogh wanted so badly to associate with The Good Doctor. Let's look at this Germanie Lassatou in more detail. Yeah, you can't make it out, but you can see that there is writing on those volumes. So this is a quote, I think it's from Wikipedia anyway, this is just more details about the book. The story is that of a poor country girl who comes to Paris, where her temperament renders her peculiarly liable to temptation. She succumbs to nymphomania, which finally brings her to death on a hospital cot. The study is based on actual observation by the authors of their own maidservant, Rose Malingre, whose double life they had never suspected. It was dramatized by Edmond de Goncourt and produced at the Odeon in 1889. Remember, Vincent van Gogh died in July 1890. So the fact that this was dramatized as like a play, I guess in Paris the year before, means that it probably was in the newspapers. It was probably like in the same way that the Marvel, the Avengers is sort of a worldwide blockbuster. That was probably a big story, a big production in Paris just the year before. And Vincent van Gogh actually has the book with him to the extent that it's Vincent van Gogh's book. And then he puts it down on the table to put it there. But let me just slow that down again and go through it one more time. This is the story of a poor country girl. Now, let me ask you, would you say that Van Gogh was kind of a poor country boy in the sense that he's a guy that is rambling around the countryside, whether it's in Orvez, whether it's in Arles or around Arles, even at the asylum, it's like a poor country boy, right? A kind of a country bumpkin. He's sort of wandering around the countryside. And does he come to Paris? Yes, he comes to Paris. Vincent van Gogh was often somewhere else and then he would come to Paris. He was, anyway, he went from Arles, when he left Arles, he went to Paris. He would also go from Orvez to Paris, this country boy going to the city. And it says here, where her temperament renders her peculiarly liable to temptation. Was Van Gogh peculiarly liable to, was he tempted to drink absinthe? Was he tempted to go to brothels? Was he tempted to do things in excess? Was he tempted to, when he had money, to blow it all on prostitutes and whatever? Yes, that is why his brother was giving him small allotments of his inheritance, because he was peculiarly liable to temptation. It says she succumbs to nymphomania. Did Vincent van Gogh succumb to nymphomania? And that is the key question we're kind of asking right here, is did he succumb to nymphomania in Orvez? Did he succumb to a kind of obsession in that specific sense with Marguerite Gachet? Yari's got a book that's all about that. It's Vincent van Gogh's book. Look at what he's reading. Look at, as Stephanie says, he's got syphilis. He didn't have syphilis because he was able to keep his his appetites in check. He didn't have syphilis because he was able to keep himself from temptation. And I guess I must just be clear, it's not absolutely confirmed that he had syphilis, but it's very likely that he did have syphilis. I'm just saying there's once again a link to that. And so this is what Van Gogh is reading. This is what he's interested in. Why is he interested in it? Because isn't he living it? Isn't this something that he's experiencing? And it's kind of like a soapy that it's like an alternate universe. This is what this person's going on. The other thing is, it's based on a maid servant who was kind of living a double life. And I think you could argue the same thing with Vincent van Gogh, that he was also living a double life, that he was originally the son of a pastor, and he also studied to be a pastor, but then he would also do things that were very unpastorly, right? I don't want to go into too much detail, but he was also kind of living a double life. Look at just the incident with his ear, just the incident of him being in the asylum. Now say this is a pastor's son, and he ends up losing his ear in an asylum, even committing suicide, if you want to believe that. It seems like he had a double life as well. And that's where we really need to go into more detail. What is going on in this double life really? That's why I say, in terms of the little drops leaking from the roof, you're going to get a little bit more information. Well, you need to actually go to the trouble to climb into the roof and step over this dangerous and risky and rickety superstructure of the roof to find what is actually going on. We need to find out what's actually going on with his double life, right? So let me just put you back into context. Remember, we're going to deal with the other book now. Remember that Vincent van Gogh died in July 1890, and that this particular book, Germini Lascito, I don't know, Bria, am I pronouncing it right? That was published in 1865. So there's plenty of time for this anti-romantic novel by two French authors. It wasn't published in Poland or Australia, published in France. Vincent van Gogh was in France. So there was plenty of time for this book to catch on in late 19th century France. So he was kind of carrying a bestseller around with him. He's kind of carrying around a popular kind of paperback. And he was a voracious reader. He often mentioned it. He talked about authors that he liked. He read Charles Dickens as well. He read books in English, probably Dutch, also French. In this regard, another thing that's really important is that's just so weird to know this. It was a novel by two French authors, this particular novel. And these two brothers who wrote this book, the Goncourt brothers, Edmund and Jules, they were collaborative sibling authors, and they were apparently inseparable in life. And so here you have also the parallel of Vincent and Theo, who are like collaborative artists or collaborative in terms of art. They were also inseparable in life, and to such an extent that they were actually buried side by side to represent that they were these inseparable brothers. But Vincent van Gogh was reading a book by these brothers, he being himself a brother in a situation like that. According to Wikipedia, this is just a bit more details about the authors. And you want to now get into Vincent van Gogh's headspace. Who are these authors that he's reading about? What is their story? So their career as writers began with an account of a sketching holiday together. Then they published books on aspects of 18th century French and Japanese art and society. Now, Vincent van Gogh was also very interested in Japanese art. Where do you think that came from? It also says here they invented a new kind of novel. Well, Vincent van Gogh invented a new kind of art. and their novels are the result of a new vision of the world. Vincent van Gogh's art is the result of a new vision of the world, a new way of seeing things. Do you see how books can reveal a certain psychology? The fact that Vincent van Gogh felt a certain way meant that he was reading books that resonated with his way of seeing things, or he was influenced or inspired by those books to see things a certain way. Let me read that again. They invented a new kind of novel, and their novels are the result of a new vision of the world in which the very element of sight is decomposed, as in a picture of Monet, seen through the nerves. In this conscious abandonment to the tricks of the eyesight, the world becomes a thing of broken patterns and conflicting colors and uneasy movement. A novel of the Goncourts is made up of an infinite number of details, set side by side, every detail equally prominent. Now, it's interesting in the Gabby Petito case how books are also placed within the scene to communicate the intent, the philosophy, the psychology of the artist. So in Brian Laundrie's case, he had books that he was showing what he was like as a person, what his attitudes were to in terms of optimism, pessimism, his opinion of the world in terms of these books that he was reading. Fight Club, Annihilation, what could be a better, more apposite title than that, given what happened to his girlfriend, what happened to him. And then also this book, we know he was reading Annihilation on the hammock while he was on this van life journey. And then also, what is the other one? Stephanie, help me out. What is that other book with a bird that's upside down? Germanie, Lesser 2. Thank you for that. I'm trying to think of the word that you're talking about. I think it's not lecherous. It is salacious, maybe. Lullaby, that's it, yeah. You get a certain kind of perspective on Brian from Lullaby, and Brian possibly got some of his perspective also from Lullaby, which is a pretty disturbing thought. Equally with this, the fact that Vincent van Gogh was carrying around this book and puts it in a portrait, not once, but more than once, shows that this book had a big impression on him. It's giving you a really colorful sense, a very intimate sense of how he thinks about a whole host of different things. Again, you may think this is much ado about nothing, and I saw one comment there sort of just going, okay, well, how does this actually apply? So get to the point. Consider that Van Gogh actually painted a painting that basically only focused on the book. And it's the same book alongside a flower and a statue of a naked female figure. And here it is again. I wonder if that's, okay, so there's a statue there, and there's the book below it. There are actually two books there, but one of them is Germanie Lasseter. Okay. I've said many times that people are so preoccupied with Van Gogh's madness, they forget about his sanity. They forget that he was also a man with a man's appetites and desires. He was a man that read books. He was a man that ate meals. He was a man that would see a pretty girl walk by and feel interested. He was a single man as well. He was a bachelor. He wasn't married. His brother, who was younger than him, was married, had just got married and had a small child. Did that have an impact on him? And we see at the time he was painting Dr. Gachet, he was reading a book about a real-life person who had nymphomania, who succumbs to nymphomania. So you kind of got to ask the question, almost innocently, if you had no idea what Vincent van Gogh did in his past life, did in his backstory, you kind of got to ask, was he thinking about sex? Was he thinking about nymphomania in Norvège? Was he thinking, I wouldn't mind, blah, 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 you know what I mean? He's reading a book about a real life person who's kind of living a double life, who has nymphomania, who succumbs to nymphomania. And he very likely did have syphilis, and he was definitely a guy who could party up a storm, as Paul Gogh experienced. That is why, as I say, the inheritance had to be held back, because he couldn't hold himself back. So now let's take this a step further. First of all, we know in the second version of the portrait, this is so important. In the second version of the portrait, both books aren't there. Both books are excised. This suggests Dr. Gachet didn't approve of being associated with these books. Who would? Would you want to be in a portrait where there's a book sort of, lying kind of over here, and you can kind of see that the title of the book is blah, 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 and the book's about a nymphomaniac. And nymphomaniac kind of thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Would you want that book as part of your self-portrait or part of your portrait? So that's the one aspect to it. The other is, can you imagine if Marguerite saw, for example, the partially finished portrait, or she saw the portrait being painted while Van Gogh was working on it, or if her father even just spoke about it and perhaps even complained about it over dinner or lunch or whatever, and it was just like, this Van Gogh guy, why on earth does he have to spoil this portrait by putting these dumb novels in there? What an idiotic thing to do. It just, But the question is, was Marguerite possibly curious about this aspect, right? Wouldn't she have been curious? Could there perhaps have been a discussion about the book with her? Could there be a discussion about the book between her and her father, or between her and her brother, or between her father and her brother, and then she overheard it? Did she ask if she could borrow it to read it? Do you see how all of these things are just ordinary things that could have taken place in a scenario like that? You see someone doing the portrait, you see, there's some books. What is this book? I haven't actually read this. Do you mind if I read this? What's this book about? Blah, 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 blah. This book came out in a play last year. Do you know about that? Oh, yes, my friend saw the play, blah, 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 right? Stephanie says, no wonder it's not the chosen one in front of Dr. Gachet's house. Well said. Stephanie says, what a conversation starter. I'm not sure what you mean by you totally agree with Bailey. What do you mean totally agree with what aspect? So now we go to number 2, the second book. I guess it's Monet Salomon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Let's look at what Jean says. Vincent was a bit passive-aggressive or had a sly sense of humor. The inclusion of those books is an amazing observation. It is. So at the bottom of page 54, going on to page 55, Bailey again briefly describes the second novel as being, quote, a sensitive artist and his model, end quote. That's the extent that he talks about the plot of the second book. Just as he does with the first book, it's sort of one short little sentence. It doesn't take it further than that. Now, as I've said repeatedly, in true crime in general, and in the Gabby Petito case in particular, that you can literally read the minds of the perpetrators by looking at their reading material. It's not just what they're reading, it's when they're reading it and what happens around that. Yeah, Monet Salomon is the title of the second book. In the Ramsey case, Mindhunter, some say, could have provided a blueprint for staging the crime scene. That can inform you a lot about what people were thinking about in that situation. And when you actually study the chapters in that book, it's as startling as this chapter or this episode hopefully is to you guys. It should sort of send shivers down your spine, like, wow, suddenly I'm seeing a much bigger picture here. Yeah, Stephanie says Bailey glazes right over the synopsis. Is it intentional? I just don't think he sees much in that. It could also be that he doesn't want to go there. Like, he doesn't want to, it's like opening cans of worms. As soon as you do that, you're going to be asking questions. Oh, if Vincent van Gogh's reading this, what does that say about who he really is? And that is where I think you've got to wonder, why wouldn't you want to know who he really is? I mean, isn't that what this book's about, who he really is? Isn't that what you trying to, yeah, you've got this picture of him. Isn't it the whole idea who he really is, right? In Amanda Knox's case, Amanda was reading the gritty final installment of Harry Potter. You know, you can look at the timing of the Amanda Knox case, when that actually played out, and when the last book in the Harry Potter series came out, and look at what that book's about. It's about death. It's about the boy, where the boy wizard has to kill someone and defend himself. I got the impression that Amanda Knox was kind of obsessed with Harry Potter, to the extent that her boyfriend was like a Harry Potter lookalike. And you might be listening to this and thinking, you know what, this is just silly. I think you're totally blah, blah, blah. But when you pay attention to it, you can actually see how people are profoundly influenced by popular fiction, popular movies, popular music. During a particular episode in someone's life, they can be profoundly, I don't want to say hypnotized, but their thoughts can be influenced greatly by certain things that are in the popular space, if I can put it that way. In the same way that in true crime, you could say during the Gabby Petito case, while everyone was talking and thinking about it, you were aware of whatever, the tragedy of the pandemic or whatever. You know what I mean? That could be preoccupying your mind space during a particular time of your life, right? Books also feature in the Chris Watts case, Hold Me Tight, although in that particular case it wasn't read. Also the Barry Morphew case, that are almost central to the crime scene itself. So books are really important. So what is Monet Salomon about? According to Wikipedia, Monet Salomon is a Jewish model, and Nazdi Coriolis's mistress. With her frank, ignorant nature and exotic Jewishness, she delights her lover, but when she becomes famous as the subject of his successful painting, there grows in her a pride that causes her to change. Mistaken for Coriolis's wife, she finds this status attractive. When she becomes a mother, her greed for success comes to the fore, and she gradually gains ascendancy over her lover. When they are married, the fulfillment of her ambition spells the death of his creativity. And so this is, once again, a book that is quite salacious in a way. It's quite racy in a way. It's about almost like, I don't want to say women's rights, but it's kind of about a woman who almost discovers her power as a woman at the expense of a man, who kind of enjoys, in a weird way, it's almost like what I think happened with Suzanne Morphew. A woman who realizes, I'm not going to put up with this, or I'm going to use what I have, and I'm going to get out of this situation and do this. Not quite the same, but just that she enjoys a new sense of her status, and she gains ascendancy, kind of, in a sense. But in this particular story, she, by getting what she wants, her lover loses his ability to create. And so I'm sure as an artist, Van Gogh was very interested and fascinated, and it's something he also wrote about, that if you want to produce good art, you can't screw around all the time. That's something he was aware of. And so here is a book literally about this contest between being attracted to someone and even in love with them and whatever, and then your artistic ambitions that need to be sacrificed in lieu of those desires and attractions, or do you push those aside? And Van Gogh had done both. There were times where he alternately, I guess, engaged in his desires, and there were times where he did push that aside and prioritized his art. And the question is, in this flurry, this furious flurry of painting, where he was, I guess, pushing aside his feelings, was there some kind of other feeling, a subterranean feeling, almost like a double life feeling resurging in him, right? Was there this sense of, bear in mind, he was, for all intents and purposes, healthy when he went to Orvez. I mean, he was healthy enough to go painting every day. With that, wasn't there also a, what's the word, a flaming of his libido, to put it in a weird way, a flaring, I guess, of his libido. But the other thing to pay attention to is look at the reading material that he's reading about. He's reading about women who are not afraid to be sexual, I guess, in both of these books. I guess sexually assertive women. And bear in mind, this is in 1890, it's not even the 20th century, right? And do you think Vincent van Gogh, who seems to be a fairly passive dude, he can go to a brothel, but what about sort of normal people in society? Do you think he would like to have a girlfriend who isn't a prostitute? Someone who's just the girl next door kind of thing. In terms of the other character, Nazde Coriolis, he's a young painter. That's the other character in this book, who vows never to wed because he believes marriage and fatherhood destroy the artist's creativity. And I've highlighted that in bold where I've written it down here. He's a young painter who vows never to wed because he believes marriage and fatherhood destroy the artist's creativity. Now look at Vincent van Gogh. He was a young painter. He was 37, but even prior to that, vows never to wed. I don't know whether he vowed never to wed, but he certainly didn't ever wed. And he did see a conflict between, I don't know if one would say marriage and fatherhood, but certainly sex and artistic creativity. Let's just see there's quite a long comment there. Jean says, I'm glad Nick took the risk. Random House and others are silencing anything controversial, as a writer friend is experiencing right now. Vid Inquiry says, wow, I'm glad you are wowed. I was pretty wowed when I read this. Fascinated by Monet Salomon's physical perfection and exotic Jewishness, he takes her as a model and his mistress. When fame and motherhood arouse her pride and ambition, he has not the strength to struggle against either her domination over him or the resulting death of his creativity. Now, if you just take that, this book is the other book in the portrait of Dr. Gachet, and you have the artist fascinated by this woman's physical beauty, her physical perfection, and then what does he do? So you have this artist who goes, wow, she's so beautiful. What does he do? He takes her as a model and then also makes her his mistress. And so that's the book that is literally on the table of Dr. Gachet, and then later on he paints a portrait of Marguerite Gachet, and the question is, didn't that thought just occur in his mind of her physical perfection? Bear in mind, she may not have been a supermodel, but she was 21 years old. I think she turned 21 during his stay there. So just in terms of her youthfulness, she would have been, I think, very attractive. For a 37-year-old, he had to have thought, I mean, just in a very basic way, she was a young woman and probably would have seemed attractive to her. You know what I mean? And I think that just that idea, wow, she's beautiful, I want to take her as my model and sleep with her. Did that not occur to Vincent van Gogh? And equally, could that thought not have occurred to the doctor? That is this what this? He's an artist and he's reading about this guy who did this with a model. Isn't Vincent thinking about this? He's reading about this. Couldn't he not be thinking about this? In the same way, Marguerite Gachet could also be thinking, wow, he's an artist. He wants to paint me. I wonder if he wants to sleep with me. And if she's not thinking that, Van Gogh, while he's painting her, is he not thinking that? The other thing that I just want you to think about, this is where you kind of open your imagination a little bit. Now, do you think that there's a failure of imagination in true crime? There's a failure to see things. Someone was saying, anyway, in terms of the Alec Baldwin case, the videos just come out and someone was like, wow, I didn't realize they were standing so close together. Because you need to imagine that. That's why the animation is there, because people aren't imagining it in a visceral way. But we do need to imagine it in a visceral way. You're not always going to have animations, right? So what I want you to imagine is Vincent van Gogh going about painting his portrait of Marguerite Gachet at the piano. There she's at the piano. He's already painted the portrait of Dr. Gachet with the books and everything. So it's very likely that the subject has come up. And so while they are sitting there kind of in silence, we don't know whether Dr. Gachet was at home that day, who was at home that day. And so here he is, and it's not something that he does in 10 seconds. It's not something he does in 30 seconds. It's not something he paints in 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Probably takes quite a long time. During this long time, where there's just the sound of a piece of charcoal or whatever, a brush scratching on the canvas, there's a long period where he can gaze at Marguerite Gachet. There's a long period where she experiences an artist gazing at her. And I don't know how much is experienced a man looking at her intently for such a long time, a non-family member man kind of thing. But the scenario that I'm trying to portray is, couldn't a thought cross Vincent van Gogh's mind as he's painting her? I wonder whether I could take her as a model, or how can I put it? I wonder whether she would model for me again and again and again and become my mistress. And if you think about it, it was always a bad idea because Dr. Gachet wouldn't abide by it. But that thought had to have been there. The question is also, was the thought there with Marguerite? If Marguerite knew about the book, wasn't she also thinking, wow, I wonder what this guy's thinking? And did she play with the idea? Was she totally unaware? Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. But I doubt whether Vincent van Gogh whether that thought didn't cross his mind. Do you follow? PW says, loved your Baldwin episode today. Thanks. Stephanie says, great point, Stephanie. I love that comment. No wonder Dr. Gachet is holding on to the foxglove in the second portrait. Yeah, get these books off the table. Let's keep it clean, folks. Karina says he challenged Gashay openly. Jean says, I love that comment as well. The doctor's dad brain definitely thought that. Actually says, flex the muscle of the imagination. Sharon says, sad that women of the past couldn't decide their own mate. Or do you mean fate? Well, in the novels they did. So certainly the novels were inspiring women to take charge to some extent. I think it took a couple of decades for it to go further than that. So you can clearly see how Van Gogh would be particularly drawn to this narrative because it's about an artist, because he was living it. Again, you can see why the good doctor probably wouldn't want to be associated with such a raunchy read. Hence, that book's also taken out of the fake Dr. Gachet. It's not that he takes the one book out but leaves the other one in. He takes both books out. He says, let's just have the poisonous flower. Thank you very much. Let's just keep the focus on that. Thanks. On page 55 of Bailey's book, I highlighted the following, quote, Vincent had depicted Is Monet Salomon in a still life 3 years earlier, and he lent Dr. Gachet a copy of the book. I'll let that sink in for a moment. Did you get that? On page 55 of this book by the art historian, art expert, Martin Bailey, he says that Vincent had painted this particular book. I've showed you the painting a few minutes ago. He also lent Dr. Gachet a copy of the book. He lent Dr. Gachet a copy of that book, which means Dr. Gachet was reading a book about a nymphomaniac that he knew Vincent van Gogh was reading, which would give Dr. Gachet an insight into what Vincent was reading and thinking. And that's all fair and well, except now Vincent wants to paint his daughter, wants to paint her again, wants to paint her again. Stephanie says, highlighted, good, okay. If Van Gogh painted the same book in the space of 3 years, the same book twice, and he gave Dr. Gachet a copy, you can imagine just how much the book meant to him. He was carrying it with him. It was part of his luggage. It was part of his luggage to Arles in the south of France. It was part of his luggage through the year at the asylum. And here it is in Auvergne. He still has it. It's a big deal. It's not just he read the book and then he threw it away. He's carried this book with him for years, right? In the same way, in Brian Laundrie's case, Lullaby, I think, was a big deal to him. You see the book coming up again and again. Fight Club comes up again and again. You don't draw pictures and put quotes up on your social media if a book hasn't made a huge impression on you. Same thing, you don't draw paintings of a book and put the portrait of Dr. Gashay at the time that it sold was the most expensive painting in the world. You don't put books in portraits if they don't have massive significance. And the answer is that they did have massive significance. They have massive significance in the story. They have massive significance to Vincent van Gogh, and they had significance to the doctor in the sense that he read one of those books. And possibly, it had significance to Marguerite Gachet, given she was this young woman within the scenario of these two other men reading books about young nymphomaniacs living a double life. Is that going to make you paranoid? Are you going to look at someone and think, I wonder whether you are thinking this or wishing this or fantasizing about this or whatever, right? Also consider what Van Gogh was possibly doing when he was too sick to paint. So he's got this book with him and he's going through periods where sometimes he is, bear in mind, his work ethic was very on the ball in Auvergne, but it wasn't that on the ball in Saint-Remy. So on his off days, what was he doing? And so the same way we binge watch Netflix series, isn't it likely that he binge read these books and then read them again and again? And he was so fond of them, he sort of knew them off by heart. And so if he was alone and with nothing to do, he would maybe just read the book again. I've read certain books that I really enjoy multiple times. Centennial by James A. Michener is one example. And if he was doing that, if he was binge reading them again and again, carrying them wherever he was going, liking them so much that he was kind of putting them in portraits and painting them and whatever. What were they about besides art and obsession? Sex. They were about sex. And also independent sexual young women. Bailey also adds the following. This is a quote. And this is dealing with another book. Van Gogh also gave Dr. Gachet Edmond de Goncourt's La Fille Elisa, the tale of a woman who went mad and she was forced into prostitution and then murdered a man after he raped her. Right? And what I've highlighted there are just the last couple of words. A woman who murdered a man after he raped her. And that's a book Van Gogh gives Dr. Gachet as well. It's by the same author. And so this thought is also in Dr. Gachet's mind of a man rapes a woman and the woman then murders him. Dr. Gachet is also thinking, wow, are you reading about that as well? Now we've gone up a level. In terms of sort of, if you take some of the books Brian Laundrie was reading, well, Lullaby is up a level from Fight Club. It's more, what's the word, sick, I guess. It's more depraved. It's more criminal. Definitely, I think that's the word. It's definitely more criminal. So with this, we not only have an insight into the narrative thought process going on in Van Gogh's mind. Let me just say that again. With this particular thing where he's given Dr. Gachet another book about a woman who went mad and was forced into prostitution, and Dr. Gachet now realizes this is what this artist is reading. This is what this dude who's coming to my home is reading. We have an insight into the narrative thought process going on in Van Gogh's mind. But now we also have an insight into Dr. Gachet's narrative thought process that is giving him a narrative sense of who the stranger is in Vincent van Gogh. Remember, we spoke about there was an initial hesitation, but then they became firm friends. And then after that, how long did it take Dr. Gachet to read some of these books? Maybe he was quite a busy doctor. Maybe he read an odd chapter here and there on the train trip into Paris and the train trip coming back. But let's just imagine it took him, say, 3 weeks to read the one book, 3 weeks to read the other book, or whatever, 2 weeks. You can see how, as time goes by, he may have started developing reservations. Well, I found these books quite interesting, but who is this guy that gave me these books? And he's back at home while I'm in Paris attending to patients. He's back there with my daughter. Am I comfortable with that? He's asked to do another portrait of my daughter. He has this scene about an artist, right? Could that have been filling that narrative? Could that have been developing a paranoia in Dr. Gachet's mind? Now, I mentioned right at the beginning of this live stream, this sort of analogy of the cat, that the narrative of the cat is to cover over its food and excrement, even though the reality is that there's nothing to cover it over with. It's in a kitchen scenario, there's no dirt to cover it over with, besides the gravel in the tray, the excrement tray, the litter box, right? But what is happening is the cat is operating out of its own narrative, and people can also do that. You operate out of a narrative, and you're not looking at the reality, you're looking at your narrative, and you can't escape that narrative. The narrative governs all. You're not actually basing something from reality, from what's actually happening, what's actually going on. You're basing it from a narrative. And so one's got to ask, could this have played a very big role, not only with Vincent van Gogh, the narratives he's reading, he's drawing from and imposing, projecting, transferring onto the situation with Dr. Gachet and Marguerite, but also Dr. Gachet is also doing that. Or Dr. Gachet sees Vincent van Gogh's like, I can see what you're thinking. I can see that you read this and that's what you're thinking. In other words, the narrative is becoming a thought process. Does that make sense? Yeah, Bria asked, does anyone know how Blanche passed away? I heard that she died of syphilis, but I'm not sure where I heard that, and I'm not quite sure what the source is of that. I think you also asked, how did Marguerite die? I think it was just old age. I think she died in 1949, but her brother Paul lived well beyond that. I think it's also conceivable that over lunch or over dinner, Dr. Gachay's children, Paul and Marguerite, they may have inquired what their father was reading. And if he told them, they'd be caught up in the same psychology as well. And just think of these words: the tale of a woman who murdered a man after he raped her. Dad, what are you reading? The tale of a woman who murdered a man after he raped her. Dad, how's that book going? I'm reading the tale of a woman who murdered a man after he raped her. Next, Bailey briefly references digitalis, but he neglects to mention that it's actually toxic. I find it a tad odd, I don't know what Stephanie thinks, I find it a tad odd that Bailey writes that Dr. Gachet probably grew this plant. Probably. It's in both portraits, and it's in his garden, and it's painted with him in his garden today. It's also, you can find digitalis in his garden today. When I went to Orvez in 2019, I photographed foxgloves in his garden when I was there. So why say he probably grew this plant? I mean, I don't know, I find that a bit odd. Karina, I don't think so. But I guess it's a thought. Stephanie says full circle. I do agree with Bailey that the wavy blue background in the portrait of Dr. Gachet is very likely symbolic of the actual representation of the view from the doctor's garden, which, as Bailey rightly says, enjoys an extensive vista. If you go to Dr. Gachet's house in Orvez, you climb, you sort of go from the road. There's almost like a concrete wall, and then you sort of walk up quite a steep staircase, and then the house is at the top of that staircase, and then if you turn around, you've got a very extensive view over Orvez, over the road, and over Orvez, over the river, and over everything from there. Obviously, also over the garden. So, like the garden, behind the garden is this extensive view. I'm going to just quickly gloss through a few more additional highlights. We're near the end, but I kind of just want to quickly go through the rest. This is from page 58. It's a quote from Bailey. He says, "There's little evidence that Dr. Gachet actually suffered from melancholia, well, except that his wife had died, and when Van Gogh painted him, he homed in on this trait above all." He also wrote about it and mentioned that's what he's trying to convey. Then another quote: "The portrait painted from life in Dr. Gachet's garden was intended to be passed on to Theo." So the portrait that he painted of Dr. Gachet, the fate of that portrait, the intention of that portrait, it was meant to be handed to his brother. It wasn't meant to be given to Dr. Gachet. So it was like, "Dr. Gachet, can I paint your portrait?" "Yes." "Cool, thanks. Well, I'm not going to give you the portrait I'm painting of you. I'm going to give it to my brother. I'm hoping my brother can sell the portrait I'm doing of you," right? And so the rest of the quote is, "So the doctor seems to have asked whether he could also have a copy. Van Gogh was delighted to oblige." Let me just say that again. This is a quote from Martin Bailey's book. He says, quote, "The portrait painted from life in Dr. Gachet's garden was intended to be passed on to Theo. So the doctor seems to have asked whether he could also have a copy. Van Gogh was delighted to oblige." My response to that is, really? it's an awfully big assumption that Van Gogh said, oh, okay, I'll just paint the portrait of you again, don't worry. Oh, do you want me to take the books out? Okay, I'll take the books out. Do you want me to kind of dumb down the portrait to sort of make it a bit, and I'm going to put up a video showing why I think the second version is fake. There's just many reasons to go into. But I highlighted the word seems. The doctor seems to have asked whether he could also have a copy. So we don't know this for a fact. We don't know that Dr. Gachet definitely asked Vincent van Gogh, dude, can you please paint my portrait again? Now, bear in mind, if he started to develop reservations about Van Gogh, like he's reading these books and it's like, wow, this guy is a piece of work. You know, this guy's reading this. Does he want the guy to paint his portrait again, or is it like, I need to create some distance here. We need some social distancing going on here, not just with me, but with my daughter as well. Did the doctor ask for his own copy? Also, he writes, Van Gogh was delighted to oblige. Well, I think Van Gogh wanted to paint Marguerite. I don't think he really, I mean, he's painted this sort of depressing portrait of the doctor. Does he want to do it again? I don't think so. Did he do it again? I don't think so. Paul Gachet Jr., Dr. Gachet's son, claimed what I think is the fake copy was well superior to the original first version. I don't know if you saw that in the chapter, Stephanie, where Martin Bailey writes that Dr. Gachet's son's opinion of the second version was that it was well superior to the original or first version. And now, like, whoa, how do you come up with that? And so the only way that you can kind of see that is if you take those books out, okay, now it's superior. If you take away these distracting, salacious, seedy paperbacks, okay, now the doctor looks, now he looks respectable. Now it's a superior painting. But it's not a superior painting. It's not the better artistic version of the portrait. As I say, I am going to put up a video where I explain why the one is fake, why I think the one is fake. The other thing is that I think Paul Gachet Jr. is the only person who seems to think that the second version is better than the first version. And which version is outside Dr. Gachet's home? The second version. Which version is, I think it's in the Musée d'Orsay, the second version. In other words, you can actually see it today. Where's the other version? Gone. And I think it's very interesting that Dr. Gachet's son has this peculiar impression of the second version. Is peculiarly impressed with it, is peculiarly got a divergent attitude to it. Is there more to that attitude? Like I said, I believe it's fake. Well, if he was involved in faking it, or his father was, and he was involved in keeping that a secret, isn't it any wonder that he would say, no, that's the superior version. That version that he gave to Theo, that's kind of crap. This version, that's really the better version. You know, based on my artistic genius, based on my education in art, this is definitely the better version, right? In terms of the last few pages, I don't want to go into too much detail except to observe that the etching of Dr. Gachet also appears to be fake. I don't know what you think, Stephanie. This is also where Paul Gachet Jr. features prominently in the story. We're going to come back to Paul Gachet again and again because he's got this interesting habit of coming up in retrospect, like everything's happened, and he comes afterwards and says, oh, did you know that happened? Did you know that also happened? Oh, okay, why didn't you tell us at the time? You know, he has this interesting habit of coming after the fact. Oh, that also happened. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And you would know because you were there. Can Marguerite confirm this. Oh, so she's died. So it's only you who knows. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So besides the work itself, the etching feeling too wonky to me in all the wrong areas, it's dated 15 May 1890. Do you see anything wrong with that? The etching is dated 15 May 1890. What's wrong with that? Anyone? This etching, the only etching that he apparently ever did of Dr. Gachet, just by blind luck, is dated 15 May 1890. Anything wrong with that? No, it is before he arrived in Auvers. So he arrived in Auvers, I'm not sure if it was the 18th or the 20th of May. He wasn't even in Auvers to paint it or to do it. You're right, Stephanie. So he only arrived in Auvers a few days after the date on the etching, right? So Bailey goes to some trouble. I'm not going to read it here. I'm sure Stephanie has seen this. Bailey goes to some trouble repeating Gachet Jr.'s claims, basically defending the alleged authenticity of the etching. Goes into quite a lot of detail. He says, Bailey says this, that he probably meant to write June 15 instead of May 15. Oh, okay. That's, again, quite a big assumption. So he's assumed that the Van Gogh's impression of the doctor's psychology is mistaken. That's an assumption. Well, what if it wasn't an error? Is assumed that Dr. Gachet asked him to paint another portrait. That's also quite a big assumption based on one of the most expensive artworks in history. Oh, he seems to have asked. There's no documentation that he did ask. You don't have Vincent writing to, you would think Vincent would write to his brother saying, Theo, that's amazing. You know that picture, that portrait I did of Dr. Gachet? Dr. Gachet has asked me to paint him again because he wants the portrait to keep for himself. This is the most important, the most prominent person he's ever painted. And this guy is saying, Jeepers, that's such a great portrait. Why don't you do it again for me? Well, why doesn't Vincent say anything to his brother about it? This is a huge compliment to him. It's a huge achievement. It's a coup. But Vincent doesn't make a peep about it. Timmy, do you want to make an appearance? Timmy, don't kick the keyboard. Okay, there we go. Actually says Paul has a ego stake in the story. He also has a financial stake. Sky says, I'm sorry, I thought it was 11, so just logged on and missed most of it. Okay, sorry about that. Stephanie says, the reasoning for the date written is ridiculous to me. Yes, it's just a very easy way of saying, yeah, it probably was June 15. Why did they write May 15? You know, did they, you know, like, which month is it? How often have you gotten the month wrong? It is the 17th of January right now. No, it's not. It's February. You're not going to make a mistake like that. You're really not going to make a mistake, especially given when, you know, the anniversary of the doctor's wife's death, they would have known what month it was. It would be very, very clear what month it was. There's also, you know, spring is springing in May, it's summer in June. You're not going to be like, oh, spring is springing in June, you know. I also think it's laughable. As I say, it's a pretty big assumption, and he also makes, to my mind, weak arguments for why the etching is by the same artist as the portrait. So he's trying to sort of back why this is the genuine article. He says it was also painted in the garden. The doctor's head is at a similar angle. His left hand is at a similar angle too, etc., etc. It's not particularly convincing. He's not going into the merits of the art. What do you call it? The touches, the artistic touches, and the sort of delicate, what do you call it? I don't want to say brush strokes because it was sort of done in a different way, but is not finding the correct things to resonate. In other words, the idiosyncrasies and the characteristics of the original artworks and the artist. Now he's just saying broad stuff like, well, it's the same guy in the same place, and that's at a similar angle. It's just so amateurish and dumb, just like the date. It's like, oh, you meant to put June 15th. It's just, if this is true crime, it would be totally unconvincing. You'd be like, dude, lie detector deception indicated, right? Marguerite Gachet died in 1949. This is where it also gets quite interesting. And it was after her death, as the sole heir, that Paul Gachet seemed to have produced a surprise archive of Van Gogh's art. So this is really important to stress. The time that there was this big reveal, hey everybody, look at all these Van Gogh artworks. That happened in the 1950s after Margarita died. So obviously his father died as well. So Paul Gachet emerges and it's like, hey everyone, look at all of these Van Gogh artworks, and he has an etching as well and whatever. And now he's got complete control of the narrative to say, this is when this was painted, and he kept that in his shed and whatever. And everything is very secretive for decades. But now suddenly, look at all these Van Goghs that I've got. Okay, that's interesting. I've also got a second portrait of Dr. Gashay. Do you want to see it? That's interesting. Okay, yeah, let's see it. See where I'm coming from. And why would you keep all of this a secret? Well, bear in mind the circumstances of Van Gogh's death. Did some of his art supplies disappear when he died? Where did they go? And then what happened to them subsequent to that? So Paul Gachet seemed to have produced a surprise archive of Van Gogh's art in the 1950s. Bear in mind, Van Gogh died in 1890, so 60 long years go by. And then suddenly, hey guys, check out all these Van Goghs I've got. And who brings them out? Paul Gachet Jr., not Marguerite. So with his sister deceased, he was able to express a narrative that couldn't be challenged. It just seems peculiar to me that the treasure trove of Van Goghs emerged not only from whom they did, Paul Gachet, but also the timing of it. Couldn't it have been somebody else? Why is it coming from the Gachet family? Why couldn't it be from Joe Van Gogh or some art dealer in Paris? Why is all this coming from a Gachet 60 years later? Why is there this passage of time where nothing is heard, nothing, and then suddenly? The timing of it I also find interesting. It happens in the 1950s after Marguerite's death. Why not while she's still alive? There's some other links I would really like to have expressed to you, but it's getting a bit late here. It's 1:15 in the morning. I wonder if I can quickly highlight this. There's an article here, 15 things you didn't know about Van Gogh's portrait of Dr. Gachet. If we quickly go through them, there are two portraits. Van Gogh also made an etching of the Dr. Gachet was more than a muse. Number 4, Van Gogh's relationship with Gashay was tumultuous. Number 5, some even blame Gashay for Van Gogh's death. Number 6, the doctor was also an inspiration to other artists. Number 7, for the work, Van Gogh found inspiration in another painting. 8, Van Gogh hoped his first portrait of Dr. Gashay would bring work. 9, Van Gogh was pleased with his first portraits. 10, the portraits are part of a prolific period for Van Gogh. 11, but some believe that the portrait of Dr. Gashay may have been a fraud. 12, one of the portraits broke auction house records. 13, the threat of burning the original to ash set the art world aflame. Excuse the pun. 14, the supposed forgery is on display in Paris. So you might say, you seem very opinionated. You think this is a fake, nobody else does. Well, it's fairly, I won't say it's fairly common, but it's a fairly mainstream view that the second portrait of Dr. Gachet is questionable, if not fake. Number 15, the museum this is the part I want to emphasize. The museum, this is Musée d'Orsay, it's in Paris, tried to squelch the controversy with an exhibition. So they tried to say, guys, calm down, nothing to see here. And I'm just going to read from the bottom of this particular article. I'll put a link to it in chat if you want to read it yourself. This is point number 15, the last point. By exhibiting their portrait of Dr. Gachet side by side with authenticated works of Gachet's, right? Did you get that? At the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, they exhibited the portrait of Dr. Gachet by Van Gogh, maybe. They exhibited this side by side with authenticated works of Gachet's. So paintings by Gachet. So they have a work ostensibly by Vincent van Gogh, juxtaposed, set side by side by paintings by Dr. Gachet. Remember, he was an amateur artist. And what the Musée d'Orsay hoped was they were going to put this question of authenticity to rest, that they were going to say, you can clearly see that this is Vincent van Gogh's art and this is Gachet's art. And the museum even commissioned infrared scans and chemical analysis. Guess what the result of that was? It didn't convince skeptics. They did this to convince the skeptics, and the skeptics weren't convinced. Let's just look at some of your comments. Stephanie left. Thanks a lot for that, Stephanie. Stephanie says, I have noted another detail that Vincent included in the original portrait. Very good point. The lapel buttonhole with a small dash of red, possibly an award rosette for his role in the Franco-Prussian War, missing in number 2. Great point. That shows an eagle eye. I think it's mentioned somewhere, but that is absolutely true. Thanks a lot for your contribution there. Dr. Gachet didn't want it advertised to draw attention to his role in the war. Well, I think it could be that he didn't want to show, it's almost like a bit of a fraying to his coat. And so he may have felt like it makes me look poor, or it makes me look like I'm wearing old clothes. It could be, or it's just a detail that he didn't notice. Bria says that's a very interesting and generous donation. Vid Inquiry says, great stream. Everyone have a great night. Hugs. Okay, so you've left. Okay. Sharon says, unreal. Okay, so we're about to wrap up. Finally, there's this. Well, it does go on for a little while. Okay, so this is the last point I want to make. So let me just put this link in chat if you guys are interested. Maybe, Stephanie, I think you might be overthinking it, but I guess it's possible. So I'm also putting a link to an article written by Martin Bailey dated 6 November 2020, so a little bit more than a year ago, in the Art newspaper, and it's titled New Book Solves the Mystery of Van Gogh's Lost Harmonium Portrait. And really what he's saying there is a new book solves the mystery of Van Gogh's lost Marguerite Gachet portrait, right? Let me put a link to that. It's a really interesting article. Karina says, this was brilliant, Nick. Thank you so much. I ordered your book today. Karina and others that are interested, what I'd love you guys to do, those of you who do order my book, who do read my book, I'll be very happy to post or to read your reviews on a live, whether it's good, bad, or middle of the road. So if you read my book and you kind of go, I completely disagreed with you, and you were trying to make this point, and halfway through, I was just like, that, I think you're wrong. So good, bad, or ugly, or middle of the road, I'll be happy to read your reviews on these lives to see what you are saying, what your opinion is of this modern theory, this true crime analysis of Van Gogh. So if you want to be effusive and say a lot about, make notes while you're reading the book and make details, that's fine. If you want to say you disagree, that's fine. You want to say you agree and disagree, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. Stephanie says, thanks for reeling me in. I'm just saying that I think it's overthinking. It might not be. Maybe I'm underthinking. Thanks, Stephanie, for putting that in there. Yeah, it's good to have all the mods here. Okay, so let's finish this up. So this is a quote from that article by Martin Bailey, that the same writer of this book wrote that article. Came out in 2020. It's relatively recent. And this is where you'll see how Paul Gachet Jr. features prominently kind of in the aftermath, in the post-truth, in the, he kind of comes out the back and is like, oh, by the way, this and this and this. Oh, that's interesting. How come you waited till now to tell us? So anyway, this is a quote from that article. Quote, after completing Marguerite Gachet at the piano in late June 1890, Vincent wrote to his brother Theo to say that his friend Dr. Paul Gachet had promised to get her to pose for me another time with a little organ, the harmonium. I don't know whether that means, so it's not the piano, it's another little musical instrument. I guess that is what it means. What's quite interesting here is, you have Vincent writing to his brother quite excitedly saying, you know what, I've painted Marguerite Gachet at the piano. Guess what? I'm going to paint her again with a harmonium. Dr. Paul Gachet's promised to let me paint his daughter again. And so why doesn't, this is exactly making my point, why doesn't Vincent write his brother and say, guess what? The doctor's asked me to paint him again. Instead, he's saying, the doctor said I can paint his daughter again. Does that make sense? Does it make sense that it's unlikely that he did paint Dr. Gachet again? Because he would have said something about it. Stephanie, I think you did write a review. Anyway, goes on to, I also made the argument previously that whether Van Gogh painted a second portrait, technically his third representation of the doctor's daughter, we know he expressed the desire to do so to Theo, right? I made the argument previously that it was likely that regardless of whether he painted a third portrait or not, technically a third portrait, he expressed the desire to do so. Now we go to this article, further in the article by Martin Bailey, writes, quote, Yves Vasseur, the author of the forthcoming book, Vincent van Gogh, Matters of Identity, argues that the artist made a study for his second portrait with the harmonium. He has found what he believes to be a copy of the lost work and has even tracked down the actual musical instrument. His book, which also suggests that two drawings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. are fakes. And I guess that is Van Gogh drawings. You constantly hear about fakes and Van Gogh, constantly. He's saying his book is published in French and Flemish by Mercator Fonds this week and in English by Yale University Press next January. The new evidence that Van Gogh began to work on the harmonium picture with Marguerite Gachet is found in a 1961 document by Dr. Paul Gachet's son, Paul Gachet Jr. So at this point, Van Gogh's work's becoming really famous and so on. And so Paul Gachet Jr. is like, oh, hey, guess what? There's another picture of my sister that Vincent did. Oh, here it is, and this comes out in 1961. It's like, couldn't you have said something in 1890? Couldn't you have said something, I don't know, in 70 years, 70, not 17. And so once Vincent van Gogh becomes famous, he also did this. Oh, he also did this. Oh, I also found this. Oh, okay. So you've had it with you all this time, and now, okay, that's interesting. So it's found in a 1961 document by Paul Gachet Jr., and this is what he says. He said that his sister Marguerite had posed with the harmonium in the family home in Auvers-sur-Oise, the village where Van Gogh lived for the last few weeks of his life. Now, there are two things to draw from that. The one is, it's possible that Paul Gachet is lying, and if he is lying, then he's dishonest, and there's a lot of other things you can extrapolate from that. And the dishonesty may go into all sorts of areas. The other side is, if he's telling the truth, then you can start imagining exactly the stuff I've been talking about in these books, the Nymphomania, these independent women, whatever. So Van Gogh did come around another time that has not been documented until now, until this point in 1961. So it's kind of either been kept a secret or it's just not been documented. Van Gogh did come around another time, and he painted Marguerite Gachet at a harmonium. And then you can ask the question, why, if that did happen, why don't we know about it? Was that covered up? Was that hidden? Was there a reason not to mention it? That Van Gogh came back again and again and again to paint Marguerite? Is that not going to take your thinking in a particular direction? He recorded that his sister had posed with the harmonium in the family home where in the last few weeks of his life. I'm not sure I trust or believe Paul Gachet Jr., but if it's true, then there was a visit specifically to paint Marguerite that's been kept from us either deliberately or accidentally. The fact that Paul Gachet Jr. only remembered this in 1961 to me is very odd. And then this is a final quote from the article. We're almost at the end of this. Quote, Gachet Jr., who was age 17 at the time of Van Gogh's stay, recalled in the document that the Dutchman had drawn a light charcoal sketch of Marguerite at the harmonium in preparation for a painting. So here he is in the house and he's sketching her in charcoal, and he's going to then take the sketch, I guess, home and then paint it, properly, kind of in the comfort of his own home. He's not going to do it there. And so just listen to this detail from Gachet Jr. in 1961. 70 years have passed and he remembers it like it was yesterday. He says, wanting to preserve the charcoal sketch, this is again quoting from Martin Bailey's article, wanting to preserve the charcoal sketch, Van Gogh used a fixative liquid on the reverse side, and then he laid it on a stone in the garden to dry. That is in inverted commas, and that is a quote from the article, that he took this, what do you call it, the sketch paper, or whatever it was, and then he put it on a stone in the garden to dry, for the fixative liquid to dry. Then he says, unfortunately, the drawing then stuck to the stone, and when he tried to pick it up, it tore, right? Follow me when we go through this. This is very important. So Paul Gachet Jr.'s story is that Van Gogh put the thing, the sketch he just made of Marguerite Gachet on a stone in the garden, and then the drawing stuck to the stone, and when he tried to pick it up, it tore. And then he was so annoyed by this accident, Van Gogh destroyed the sketch. He sort of scrunched it up and I guess threw it away. And I don't know whether you want to say that Paul Gachet or someone picked up the scrunched up thing and kept it for posterity or just remembered it. But the detail that he remembers here is astonishing. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to in terms of the true crime expertise we bring to this sort of scenario is, you would say Van Gogh would never have done that. Van Gogh absolutely was invested in drawing Marguerite, and so he would never have scrunched up the thing. In other words, he wouldn't have scrunched it up and then not done the portrait of her. Does that make sense? Or she would have saved it. He would never have gone to all the trouble to arrange this portrait only to, according to this, become annoyed and destroy the sketch. So what is happening with Paul Gachet is creating both something happening and undoing it at the same time. So yes, my sister was there, and Van Gogh came, then he did something, and then he undid it. And you have something like that in Oscar Pistorius' case, where he gets up to, I think, close the curtains. This is in his crime scene. And then he gets up at night to close the curtains, and then he goes to the bathroom, shoots Reva, and then goes back to the balcony, opens the curtains, and shouts for help through the balcony door. Effectively, what he's done is, in his story, is close the curtains, then open them again. In other words, in theory, he never did close the curtains, he just opened them. But if you can kind of have a story where you do something and you undo something, that often happens in true crime. When you have something like that happen, it often is buying time, and it's, what do you call it? It's superfluous information, which is often a sign of deception. What we see here is incredible detail. We know that he's annoyed. We know that it was a fixative liquid. We know that it was on the reverse. We know that he put it out in the garden. We know that he laid it on a stone. All of this detail. He scrunched it up in a ball. He didn't just scrunch it up. And then he also abandoned the project. He wouldn't have abandoned that project. He would have wanted to paint Marguerite. Look at the stuff that he was reading. He wouldn't have abandoned the project. So it is quite a detailed account for something that had escaped his memory or not been important enough to mention in 70 odd years, wouldn't you say? And this is why there's a better candidate for Van Gogh's murderer than Dr. Gachet. It's hard to miss the involvement of his son, particularly in spinning and weaving the post-truth of Van Gogh's disputed legacy. And so this is the picture in Paul Gachet Jr.'s version of Van Gogh's version of Marguerite Gachet at the Harmonium. And so what this is implying is that Paul Gachet either saw Vincent van Gogh painting his sister, in other words, saw her posing, watched him sketching her, or he saw the charcoal sketch and he was like, oh, okay, you threw this away. Well, so this is what he did. And so here you have Paul Gachet reenacting, recreating, redrawing a sketch that Van Gogh did. And isn't that something that he did before? Isn't that something that he's done previously? Isn't that something he possibly did with the portrait of Dr. Gachet? This time it's not repainting the portrait of Dr. Gachet, it's repainting the abandoned portrait of Marguerite Gachet. And this is it. Let's turn this around. There it is. And you can see it at the article, Paul Gachet Jr.'s version of Van Gogh's Marguerite Gachet at the Harmonium. Okay. And that is my story. That's my story. And so I want to kind of wrap up by asking you guys, those two major clues, basically those two novels, the contents of the novels, the plots of the novels, does that change everything? Does that tell you not only what Vincent van Gogh was thinking about and the type of person that he was through his reading material, but it's also telling you what the Gachets knew about what Vincent van Gogh was thinking about based on Dr. Gachet himself reading the same books because Vincent gave them to him. And so could that have made Dr. Gachet paranoid about Vincent's appetites, Vincent's intentions, Vincent's approach, for example, to women? What do you think? Does it change everything? Are these two major clues in the original portrait of Dr. Gachet? Again, bear in mind, both those books are removed from the second disputed version. Does that change everything in your mind? You're allowed to say no. Do you think it does? Karina says, yes, game changers. Stephanie says, Bailey 0, Van der Leek 4. Anyone feel like I'm not making my case? Thanks, Karina. Sky says, plus materials were precious then. I don't think Van Gogh was the kind of guy who would do that. He would, he had grasshoppers fly into his paintings and he still kept them and completed them. Jean says, this blows my mind and is obviously the real story. Robbie says, yes, they are. Bria says, yes, 100%. PW says, and I tend to agree with you, but I think you can also have paranoia. You're going to bear in mind the substance of these narratives are pretty hectic. Rape, nymphomania, and so on. But I do think he would have realistic concern for his daughter, just like she's at that age where most fathers are particularly kind of, and bear in mind there's no mother figure to look after Marguerite. So you can imagine, and the doctor's lost his wife, he doesn't want to lose his daughter as well. Especially if he has lost his wife to syphilis. He definitely doesn't want to lose his daughter to syphilis, and he's a doctor, and Vincent very likely did have syphilis. And now this artist is giving him books about artists having muses and taking them as mistresses and nymphomania and so on. Is that not going, the doctor's an intelligent guy. Is that not going to raise certain thoughts in his mind? Answer, it has to. Because it had to have raised thoughts in Vincent's mind. That's why he was keeping these books, because these were thoughts that he was thinking about. Well, Jean says, I've told every artist I know, they agree with you too. That's good to see. I'm kind of waiting for someone I know kind of runs an art gallery here where I live. And, I'm kind of waiting for someone who is an expert or a authority to kind of put up their hand and say, well, this guy, this is changing art history. And on the other hand, you sort of wonder, is an art expert going to lose their credibility, lose their reputation, lose their job by kind of saying, by almost supporting Van Gogh apocrypha, Van Gogh sacrilege? That's what this kind of amounts to in a way. Because if you are the Van Gogh Museum, or you are, let's say you are Joe Van Gogh, Theo's wife, and you want to sell Vincent's art, are you going to want prospective buyers? Or are you going to want the folks at Sotheby's that are about to bid for his work? Are you going to want them to know Vincent was reading these salacious novels about sort of nymphomaniacs, Or do you prefer this idea that he was this troubled artist and just keep the focus on that? He was this troubled artist and he came up with these incredible artworks. But he wasn't really a man. He was this magician with art, and it's a mystery how out of this chaos and madness he produced these incredible works of art. But let's not deal with him as a man, as a relatable human being. Sky says, do you paint, JC? PW, hopefully the truth will out. I actually have painted, I have drawn, and I kind of have this, every now and then I see, I must say in the last 4, I think I missed one of them, but there have been at least 3 sunsets on the days that I've done these Van Gogh episodes. So for the past 3 out of 4 Wednesdays, I think I was actually sleeping through another one, the 4th one. The sunsets were just incredible on those Wednesdays. Last week was really incredible. This week was beautiful. Not like you fall off your chair, but definitely stunning. And I did think of sort of, because I was walking my dog when I saw it, I did think of jogging home and getting my phone, because I don't take my phone with me, and photographing it for you guys. But anyway, if my luck holds, next Wednesday, if there's a beautiful sunset, then I'll record it for you and put it on Instagram. The past couple of sunsets have just been so vivid. Today's, there was purple and pink and yellow, and just the sky was just very big with lots of color and lots of, in a way, a bit like the sky behind me, just lots of things going on in the clouds and a lot of color as well, and the sort of thing an artist would notice, kind of thing. Sharon says, my British grandfather was an artist. Stephanie says, your photographs are like paintings too. Thanks, Stephanie. I do try and do that. I do like the idea of snapping art, and especially with flowers. Anyway, I do kind of have this idea of being 65, 70 years old and then transitioning to art and just drawing. There are a couple of things that I want to draw right now. I have been wanting to draw for a while, but drawing it takes so much time, and it's a labor of love. And I'm actually a writer, not an artist, but I do want to make art. I do want to draw. I did draw a lot as a kid. I did draw a lot as a kid. Bria says, I would love to see the sunsets in South Africa. Sky says that print behind you looks huge. It is huge. It is, I think, 1.5 meters. It is pretty big. Actually says here, and a beautiful open rosy eye and an echoing rose and violet all around the horizon. Oh, okay. Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Like I say, Stephanie, I am thinking of, what am I doing? Okay. I am thinking of having you as part of a StreamYard thing where we can kind of almost go through a chapter together. And maybe we'll do that before we get to the end of the book. I just haven't done StreamYard for quite a while. As I say, for those of you who have ordered The Murder of Vincent van Gogh who are reading it, I'll be happy to take questions, obviously, while you're reading it, but also read out your reviews, whatever they are. Okay, so that is it. We had almost 2 hours, 45 minutes. This was a long script, but it was actually went faster. I don't know how long it took for you guys, but it went faster than I thought it would. Yeah. I remember that I subscribed, because you've got to pay for StreamYard. I presume that my account is still active. I just don't know because I haven't used it for so long. So are you guys noticing every chapter there are certain issues with Bailey's version of events? It's like it's either incomplete or it's, where he says, it seems that Dr. Gachet asked Vincent to do a second portrait. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think it seems that he was asked. If he was asked, he would have mentioned it to his brother, because he mentioned everything to his brother. This would have been one of his biggest achievements ever. Not just the portrait of Dr. Gachet, but that he was asked to do another one. Dr. Gachet was this really prominent guy. He was a art what's the word? He was someone that a lot of artists knew. And so it would have been a massive honor for him to say, hey, can you do another portrait of me? And I want to keep it. It would have been a massive, massive honor. Karina says, I can always tell when I'm getting tired, my English skills diminish. PW says, yes, definitely discrepancies. Radka has just joined us. Hi, Nick. Chat. You've come at the very, very end of this live, but good to have you here. You are very late. You are very late. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to put Timmy down so I can show you the next chapter, just the first page of the next chapter, what we'll be dealing with next Wednesday. Are you guys enjoying Are you guys enjoying this journey? Are you enjoying where all of this is going? Are you finding it a bit different to the true crime, the sort of typical true crime fodder? It's a little bit different, isn't it? It's taking our skills in true crime and applying them in kind of a brand new way. But can you see how it's still relevant? It's still applicable. You can still ask questions like, is that likely? Is that realistic? Is that person telling the truth? Does that make sense, right? So this is the next chapter, and this is also going to be a really interesting chapter. It's Family Visit, and this is about where Theo and his wife and child come and visit not only Vincent, but Dr. Gachet, and they all have a lunch together. And I don't know if you saw that was a painting that Vincent van Gogh did of the church in Auvers. I photographed that church. You see it in some of the videos where there's sort of flowers in the foreground. Some people think that that's also a fake. I'm not sure if I do. I haven't really thought about it that much, but there's some talk. I'm not sure what is wrong. I don't know if it's the canvas or what is the problem with that, but there's also talk that could possibly be fake as well. But that is going to be a really interesting one as well, because now you have all the most important people in the story together. You've got Dr. Gashay and his family, and you've also got Joe, the little baby, and Vincent all together. And what are the dynamics that come out of that? Again, you've got to ask the question, is Vincent van Gogh depressed? Is he having a bad time? Is he lonely? Is he unhappy? Is it just not working out for him in Auvers, kind of thing? And what is Marguerite Gachet, what is her experience of this family visit, and she gets to meet Vincent's brother and his wife and his little baby, and isn't Marguerite going to hold the baby? And isn't it going to be this quite intimate little, almost not reunion, but this family encounter where two families engage with one another, the Gashay family and the Van Gogh family. And these two families engaging with one another, isn't that going to bring, in a sort of indirect way, but also sort of a direct way, isn't that going to bring, isn't that going to be an opportunity for Van Gogh to rub shoulders, to offer the odd word, to chat informally with Marguerite? Isn't it going to give her a chance to just get a better idea of who he is through his brother and through everything that's going on, right? Sharon says, I'm going to watch Loving Vincent after this. You must. That's definitely part of your kind of study material. It's really something that's going to uplift you and enrich you, and it's so visually stunning. One thing that I found very weird with Loving Vincent was the black and white sort of flashbacks were in a weird way more powerful than the actual very vivid things. Not that the vivid executions weren't powerful, but there was something very authentic about the black and white sort of renditions. I'm just going to see if I can find a link so that you guys can also watch it, in case you haven't. And then I'm going to sign off. Okay, you can try this link. Hopefully it's available in English, but you can definitely try that. Sky says, are you a Patreon to Patty? Patty, are you a Patreon? Sharon says, I'm picturing us all on a picnic in Europe for a book club discussion. Well, maybe what you're seeing, who knows? Stephanie says, wish we could have a watch party somehow. Yeah. Yeah, I think one could do that with StreamYard. Maybe that's something to put on the agenda. Maybe after Stephanie and I have done shared chapter, maybe we can do a watch party. I think we should do that later on in the whole thing. PW says, between your Van Gogh analysis and Alec Baldwin coverage, I'm hopelessly devoted to TCRS. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so I think that's about it. I don't think we're going to quite make the 3-hour mark. It is approaching 2 o'clock in the morning. I really need to try and get some sleep. For me, a quick way of nodding off, because this is quite stimulating, is to have like a double or triple Jack Daniels, and then that just sort of turns the lights off. You know, you sort of drink it like a cowboy. But I don't know if I've got much. I think the bottle is almost empty, so not sure if that's going to work. Actually says Zoom, that's also an option. Okay, thanks guys. Thanks Sharon. Thank you to all the mods. Thank you for the super chats. And I hope you enjoyed this background. More than likely, we're going to have the same background in the next episode. There is another big background that's coming, but I want to leave that for a bit later on in our journey. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks to all the new members who are here. I'm not sure who have. I think there was 1 or 2 new members signed up. But anyway, thank you to everyone who's participated. And I'll see you guys next time, next Wednesday, around 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. See you then. Cheers, guys.